Hi, this is Tom. Thanks a lot for joining us today. If you are looking for a little more clarity, purpose, and direction in your homeschooling choices, you've come to the right place. Today, we're talking about minimalist homeschooling, and our guest today is Dr. Zara Fagen. She's a Chicago-based homeschooling mother of four. She's a small business owner and a frequent keynote speaker at homeschooling conferences around the country. She's also the author of the book, Minimalist Homeschooling, a values-based approach to maximize learning and minimize stress. And if that sounds interesting to you, and if you enjoy what you hear today, be sure to click the link down below here in the show notes here on YouTube to learn more about the book and possibly purchase the book. Dr. Fagen, thanks a lot for joining us this morning today. We appreciate it. It's nice to see you.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
When you think about and take a look at kind of the homeschooling landscape today, what do you see? What's your assessment of things?
Oh, goodness. That's a very broad question. So, I see a lot of things. First and foremost, I'm a mom. So, we have friends who have kids in school. We have friends who have pulled their kids out of school to start homeschooling. We have homeschooling friends who have sent their kids to school. And so I hope that what I'm seeing, especially with the virus, is that there's a much more open-mindedness about the viability of all these different options, depending on different family circumstances and their choices. The statistics show that homeschooling is on the rise, right? And with that, what I hear most is that there's a freedom in homeschooling that people are yearning for. And, of course, there's the medical freedom that is a big sort of motivator to homeschooling right now, but also I think just a lifestyle freedom. We're able to travel a lot more, and we escape that sort of rat race of packing the lunches and getting everyone out of the house and then getting everyone back in the house and doing the homework. And there's this frantic pace, I think, in a lot of American society that people are looking to get away from. Yeah. And homeschooling is allowing that freedom to a lot of people.
It certainly does. And at the same time, there's a challenge, though, within the homeschooling community and environment. And I know you're aware of this, and it has to do with kind of the, I guess, overwhelming supply of choices, or decisions.
Too much freedom.
Curriculum, textbooks, educational materials. I think for many people, even some who've been in homeschooling for a long time, and even certainly for those who are just getting started, the array and the decisions and choices to be made can almost be overwhelming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a double-edged sword, right? Having all this freedom and all of these options are a blessing, but then also it's a curse when you have to wade through all of it. And I can absolutely relate to that. And so, a lot of what I do is encouraging parents to trade the overwhelm for a little bit of clarity, right? And trade the self-doubt for a little bit of confidence, so that homeschooling can feel a lot more approachable and a little less overwhelming, for sure.
Okay, so what's the answer? What's the solution? What's the key? What are your recommendations to finding that clarity and confidence? What's the number one thing that you advise or recommend to begin with?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I recommend to most people is to get really clear on your values and your priorities when you're homeschooling. Why are you homeschooling, and what's most important to you and your children in this endeavor, right? What are you trying to gain from it? And then how do we prioritize those? Because it's very easy to look around and there are an infinite number of things that you can do, could do, would do, should do. And so if you're going with this idea that I just want to make sure I'm doing enough, that's a moving target, right? That's sort of a carrot on a stick. There will always be more, especially if you ever log on to Pinterest. There is no end in sight of all the things you could teach your children. And so I think that every homeschooler, first and foremost, needs to be really clear on what's important right now for their kids and to prioritize that and get the most important things done, because that's when we feel really successful. When we do the most important things really well, we feel successful. We don't necessarily feel successful when we do 150 things and we don't do any of them really well, right? Yeah. Even though we touched on so many different topics, if we don't feel like we really gave our best, then we still end up feeling inadequate.
Yeah. I spoke with a homeschooling mom the other day, and she talked about an exercise that she and her husband participated in many years ago. And I thought it was really powerful, really simple, but very significant as well. She was encouraged, she and her husband, to create a mission statement, for their children, that was very specific in terms of how they wanted to raise those kids, the values they wanted to put into those kids, and the eventual goal and target that they wanted those kids to be. And this simple mission statement guides every single choice and decision they make, especially with regard to homeschooling.
Absolutely. I would completely agree. I think a lot of homeschoolers sort of approach it a little backwards, right? They buy all the books and then they try to figure out how to fit it into their day.
Yeah.
And the alternative is to think with the goal in mind, right?
Right.
And I think that's what a mission statement does. It makes it really clear. And I know, my book starts with values. That's why it's called a values-based approach to maximize learning. It starts with identifying your 5 core educational values. What are you doing this and what do you most want for your children? And those can sort of adapt as your children grow, but it gives a much clearer roadmap than just diving into all the math curricula, right?
Right.
And so, absolutely, I think a mission statement would be a great place to start, or just identifying core values.
Okay, terrific. What's the second key point or second major point of emphasis that you want parents to know to keep in mind?
Yeah, so this goes along with it. I think we can talk about the definition of what minimalism is, what that means. It's a very sort of mainstream, hip thing to talk about now, but the definition that I work with is having exactly what you need and love and removing the extra so that you can focus on what's most important. And that definition comes from the Minimalists, those 2 guys who made it really popular. And so we just add on to that in an education.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about it that way, when we think about what our kids truly need and what they truly love, things become a lot simpler, right? Suddenly we can focus by removing the extra, and then we can feel like it's valuable and it's meaningful because these are the most important things. And so one thing I like to say is go ahead and identify 2 most important things and 1 really loved thing, so that you can encourage your child in what their natural propensity is
Mm-hmm.
and what they are passionate about. And in that way, we not only build up their confidence, but we also instill a love of learning, right? And we're encouraging them to pursue what they love. So they're going to be confident about themselves and they're going to get to do something they really like to do, in addition to a couple of things that they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we take this sort of formula into our homeschools, of identifying about 6 things that you're going to study at one time, right? And for every 2 needs, there's 1 love, right? And when you take that formula and you apply it to your homeschool, whether it's your subjects
Mm-hmm.
or your resources, right? Because you don't need a stack of 18 things to teach about the solar system. You need 2 or 3, or maybe even 1 really good thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when we start streamlining that way, I think it really helps. So when you go to the public library, don't get all 18 books on the solar system. Get 1, 2, 3 books that your kids are really going to love and that are going to teach what they need to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then nobody's overwhelmed, not you and not your kids either, because if they see a stack of books, you'll get a lot of pushback, right?
Yeah, to me, I mean, this sounds really good and valuable and interesting, but at the same time, it sounds kind of commonsensical, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's really, a good point to make, because I think that what happened when I started homeschooling, so my story is that I was sort of a reluctant homeschooler. I had no intention to homeschool. And I was very intentional about every other aspect of my life, right? As a business owner, you know what's going to have the highest impact. You focus your time and your energy there. And I think somehow when we become homeschoolers, there is a tendency to let emotion override these practicalities that we have in other aspects of our life.
Sure.
And we need to be encouraged to rein that in, because there's a lot of pressure. We want the best for our kids.
Sure.
We really want to give them the world. And people who have chosen to homeschool have taken on this really huge sort of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of naysayers out there. There's a feeling among homeschoolers that they sort of have to prove themselves,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's to in-laws or society or whatever it is. And so I think when all that pressure gets combined, we do lose our common sense sort of practicalities. And we think if we give our children everything, then we're doing better.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times what happens is our children shut down
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to hear any more about the solar system. Please stop, right?
Yeah.
We sort of undo our best intentions.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Obviously a big point and theme for you is clarity. And certainly that relates to clarity for the parent who's doing the teaching. Talk about how having clarity as the parent and teacher can also enhance their own confidence levels when it comes to homeschooling.
Absolutely. So this goes back to when I was talking about what's your definition of success, or we talk about the mission statement or those sorts of things. When I'm really clear on what's important to me and my family, then I have confidence when I do those things well,
Mhm.
right? If I don't have that sort of guide of what is success, then it's really hard to to ever feel confident in what you're doing, right? Because you are surrounded by an infinite number of possibilities and options.
Right. Other thoughts? What other main points that you think parents need to keep in mind that you talk about in the book that are especially helpful or useful?
Yeah, so I think that the book spends twice as much time talking about time as anything else. And I think it's important for parents to keep in mind that when we're thinking about homeschooling, it's not a question about how do I fit it all in. It's how do I do the best that I can with the time that I have available, right? And so I think when you start homeschooling, especially, there's this new component. You're trying to add on a full time job to whatever it is you've already got going on in your life,
For
right?
sure.
And
Yeah.
I think that a lot of homeschoolers think that they can just add in homeschooling and they don't give themselves the grace and the permission to carve out the time for it.
Hmm.
And so, yes, you have absolutely taken on a whole new obligation. And for a lot of people, this is a full time job,
Sure.
right?
And
So,
and
I
and
think,
and right and rightly so. But I guess whatever we can do to try to uh, maximize the time that we spend preparing for lesson plans and such, whatever we can do to save ourselves some time, I guess, is obviously critical.
absolutely. So the book talks about how you don't reinvent the wheel every day or every week or anything like that. So the book does walk people through coming up with a plan that can be used for a season, whether that's for 6 weeks, 9 weeks, 12 weeks, depending on how long you're planning for. Absolutely. You want to reuse that. You don't want to have to sit down and renegotiate your time every Sunday, right? And so I think that we have to always remember that our time also needs to be used for what's truly needed and what's truly loved. And it's really easy to get our time swept away with other things that are not. And another thing I always like to tell parents is that multitasking doesn't actually work really well with homeschooling. So when you are sort of one on one tutoring with your kids, make sure you're giving them your attention
Mhm.
because things will go a lot quicker, it will be a lot more effective, and our kids know what's valuable based on what gets our attention,
Mhm.
right? We see that at a really young age where they get really angry because we're not paying attention to what's important to them.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of times we're tempted, well, I'm at home, so I can do the laundry while I'm doing the spelling quiz, and I can wash the dishes while I'm drilling math facts. And I think everything goes a lot smoother actually if you carve out time specifically for homeschooling.
Yeah.
And then your kids can also do independent work. And
Yeah.
that's when you each do your own thing.
Yeah. Certainly some great insights, some valuable information, great ideas. I think it's one thing to kind of talk about it kind of in a general sense, at a high level sense, as we are right now. Can you think about a particular example in your own homeschooling experience with one or some of your children where you applied one or some of the principles you talk about in your book, and what was the outcome? Can you give us some more specifics here?
Sure, absolutely. So, for example, in our home, when we choose our subjects that are most important right now, my children will finish them much quicker. So, for example, my middle schooler finished a year's worth of his middle school biology in the first semester, simply because we are able to move at his pace and we are able to do that. And so, I think when you actually focus, you do get so much more done and
Mhm.
it is so much more valuable to them. So a lot of times my children will finish a year's worth of their work in the
Mhm.
first about 20 weeks. So we're able to switch our focus much more often,
Mhm.
right? So we're able to say, okay, you finished with biology and he loves science, so let's move on to physics. But if he didn't love science, we could then move on to poetry or something else that we didn't get to study. And so I think that in homeschooling, there's definitely this mindset shift where it's not going to look like school. You can go at your children's own pace. And so in my experience, when we do streamline, when we do focus, and when we do give it our best attention
Mhm.
for a concentrated amount of time, things actually go a lot more smoothly, and the kids are retaining it, and they're getting a lot more of sort of my attention. And so they're more engaged in the topic, and then they're getting through it a lot quicker. We're able to change our focus up.
Certainly makes sense.
Mhm.
When you look at the homeschooling community today, with what you observe, what would you say would be some of the trouble areas or problem spots that you frequently see and think it shouldn't be done that way, or they're doing that incorrectly? What are
Right.
some of those things that come to mind right now?
Yeah, so I'll see a lot of people who come and they say, I can't fit it all in, and then they'll give this laundry list of 20 things that they're trying to do. And so in the book I say, go ahead and brainstorm all the things you want your children to learn. And when I first did that, I had 18 subjects, right? I had Latin and Greek word roots, I had foreign language, I had music, I had art, and this is really common, you have spelling and grammar and literature, and you start breaking it all down. And so the biggest thing I see is that parents are afraid to pick and choose from that big list of 15 to 20 items, right? And they feel like they have to do all the things right now.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest piece of advice I have is that you cannot do 18 to 20 subjects well all the time. You have to pick.
Hmm.
And so I think that's the biggest take home message here is go ahead and brainstorm, go ahead and dream about all the things you want your child to do, and then trust that they have a whole lifetime to learn this. So I'm still learning, you're still learning, right? And so we really have to hone in on what's important right now. And especially when our kids are young, what foundational skills do they need now that then's going to open the door for them to learn all these other things, right? Now might not be the best time for Latin and Greek word roots if they're still working on their spelling,
Hmm.
right? And so I think really narrowing it down is really, really important.
Okay. Other thoughts to share or express?
No, I think we're good. I
Yeah.
mean, I'd love to see more people homeschooling, and I know there's a huge active community out there. If anyone's considering it, I think they should just look on Facebook for a local group
Hmm.
because they're out there and they
Sure.
are constantly planning field trips and willing to answer questions.
Okay, terrific. It's been a great pleasure talking with you today. For those who want to contact you or learn more about you and your programs, your content, and what you do, how can they track you down?
Sure. I'm on the web at www.zaraphd.com. You can also find me on Facebook at Minimalist Homeschooling, and I'm on Instagram and YouTube as well as Zara PhD.
Okay, terrific. And for those who want to check out the website, it's Zara, ZARAPHD.com.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking with you today. Keep up the great work with your own family and for the homeschooling community at large. And stay in touch with us. Keep us posted as far as new projects, new things that you're working on, or something newsworthy you think is important to the homeschooling community. And we'll be sure to get you back on, and we'll talk about it all some more.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Zara Fagen, the Minimalist Homeschooling Approach. Again, the book is Minimalist Homeschooling, a values-based approach to maximize learning and minimize stress. If all this sounds great to you, check out the link below in the YouTube notes and get the book and learn a little something. Zara, great to have you today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.